Hi everyone, it's me, Lee, and today I want to talk about one of the biggest mistakes that I see twin flames making. And I know this is kind of like a clickbaity video title, right? But like, I'm actually serious. I actually really do want to talk about one of the biggest misconceptions that I see out there in the field about the twin flame path. Or the Heros Gamos or sacred union, or what it means to be in this sacred partnership balance of masculine and feminine. And I'm putting those in air quotes, and I'll explain why I'm doing that in a minute. But basically, there's this idea, right? There's this idea that is floating around, not floating around, that is rampant especially in New Age spirituality circles. That I and a number of my friends and colleagues in those circles have called out on a number of occasions. Sometimes we're listened to, and sometimes, they just keep going. But basically, what this idea is, I've seen it I've seen it expressed a lot of ways, but I've most often heard this called polarity practice, right? So if you're around, like, if you're studying anything in spirituality and like spiritual relationships, sacred union type stuff out there, sacred relating, that kind of conscious relating, all of that, and you hear polarity practice, I just caution you, to use your discernment and to find out, what it is they're really talking about, right? Because the idea that is most often practiced, right? And another misconception I want to clear up is like, I have an album, that I'm working on making. I have an album that is the Twin Flame Path Hyper Sigil that I have written, that I am working on recording, and it is titled "Oh Polarity," right? So you would think, right? You would think I would be a fan of polarity practice, but it's not at all the same thing. It's they're doing it wrong, basically. And so what they're doing, what this misconception is essentially, is that in order for a sacred union relationship to achieve its actualization or its balance or whatever, what they're teaching is that the feminine and masculine must be polarized, right? And she must be the most like feminine, sweet, soft, submissive, always, looking to her divine masculine partner for his guidance, but somehow she's also like wild and erratic and also can't be trusted emotionally. And she's going to do her wild Shakti dance all around him while he stays and is the center of the storm or whatever, right? And he must be the masculine leader, protector, never wrong, always in charge, and again, he's going to be that rooted, grounded, firm, while she's going and doing her wild women, erratic, emotional dances all around him, apparently, or whatever. Do you see how like ridiculous this sounds, right? And so there are teachers teaching this, and they're teaching that this is what all your relationships need to look like in order for you to be doing it right. And I'm just like, what? I'm like, it's particularly funny to me for reasons that I will also get to in just a moment. But basically, if you ever see this in any, New Age spirit, in any spiritualities, in any circles at all, please run far away because they're wasting your time. They're wrong. And I'm going to explain to you now why they're wrong and how that all works. But yeah, that's been going on for many years. And, it bothers me because they're purporting it as a spiritual teaching. And there is a spiritual teaching that they think that's what it is, but that's not what it is. It's actually the opposite, right? So if you guys have watched some of my twin flame videos from before, I'll just unpack really quickly like what the actual twin flame path formula is, right? There is polarity involved, right? Most of the time when you first meet someone who is a twin flame, when you are and unconscious person just kind of, wandering around in your day-to-day life, and not very conscious of your programming, your patterning, your reactivity, all of the sort of patterns and habits and ways of being that you've fallen into that maybe actually aren't aligned with your true self, right? And then you meet your twin flame, right? And I want you to picture an algebraic number line, right, with 0 at the center, and each polarity, going out in these directions, right? And when you meet your twin flame, you meet the person who is the mirror image, right? They are equidistant from the 0 point in all, basically the textbook would be like all, right? I'm not saying that every twin flame relationship looks like the textbook formula, right? But like all your polarities, basically, like the ones that I can always name off the top of my head are like, yeah, masculine and feminine is one of them, but mostly like attachment styles, right? Avoidant versus anxious, runner versus chaser. Also the way your trauma has been stored in the body, desensitization versus hyperarousal. You can be introvert, extrovert, you can be, basically all these things, but you share, because all opposites contain each other, right? You share this same energetic frequency, right? It's almost like if I were to say like hot and cold, well, they're both temperatures, right? That's the shared thing that they are, but they're the opposite in expression, right? So you and your twin flame, you share this same sort of frequency, this same sort of soul essence, right? Or soul song, I've heard it called. And then you are expressed in that essence oppositionally, right? And so when you see your twin flame, if you understand that that's what's happening to you, and it took me like a year for me to figure out what was happening to me, mostly because there was nobody explaining it in any way that made sense, which I'm, now trying to correct in whatever small way I can. And when you see your twin flame, right, you meet your mirror, so you see yourself. Like all of a sudden, the world is no longer a sea of randomness, right? Now there's some sort of mathematical sense to life because you see where you are by seeing them. You're like, oh, they're all of these things, and I'm noticing them. And if you're anything like me, like you're very like you're just fascinated by this person who's shown up in your life, and all of a sudden inexplicably means a lot to you and whatever. And so you're observing them and you're noticing them and maybe like figuring out what makes them tick or whatever. And all of the things that you noticed about them that can then be applied to yourself in reverse, right? So whatever you think your twin flame has to improve upon or whatever, like why won't they get their stuff together or whatever, it's like, oh no, you have that same thing as well, only whatever yours is oppositionally expressed, right? So so yeah, and then you use this knowledge, and this is the twin flame path, right? This is the Heros Gamos initiation, because what you want to do is you want to get to, right, if this is what you want, if this is what you're calling in, you want to get to that point of inner balance, which is sacred union, right? Only when you are balanced within can you attract a partner who is balanced, also balanced with, like only with, like as within, so without, right? So when you are balanced within, then the person you attract, again, like you are working your way toward this 0 point of sacred union, of secure attachment, and using whatever triggers come up along the way, right? Whatever wounds get exposed, whatever patterns, whatever observations you have about them, about you, about your connection, you're using all of those to make the unconscious conscious, to shine a light on all those things so that you can clear them, you can transmute them, and then you can be in your sacred union place, right? You can be in your own inner union, and you can attract a partner who then will also be in union, right? Because twin flames are always equidistant from one another. And the key thing about the twin flame path is that as you are navigating this, right, because we are in the free will zone, then, a person might not choose to do the work at the same pace as you, or to do the same kind of work, or maybe maybe it's not their thing or whatever. So people can move in whatever direction they want. But if this is you, if you're doing your work and you're intending for a partner who has a twin flame connection with you, then like at some point you will get to a point where you will be in a new level and you will call in a new connection from that place, right? And you can watch my other video to talk about how I did that and figured it out. Basically, like I replicated the same exact circumstances. It was very bizarre. It was it was the night of an eclipse on a Tuesday. It was just it was a whole thing, right? So it was very, very clear signs and synchronicities how the universe was showing me how this path worked. I almost feel like, I wouldn't have believed otherwise that you could have, that your twin flame could change unless it had been shown to me so clearly, right? So that is the twin flame path, and that's how you do the work. So what polarity practice is teaching is it's saying, oh, you must be super polarized in all of your aspects, right? One of you is going to be very, and of course they relate the feminine to like, to being submissive and sweet and forever surrendering, right? So this is just basically just like patriarchy dressed up in Burning Man clothes, right? And so essentially what they're teaching is to stay polarized, right? Well, that's stagnation, right? That is not growth. That is that inner balance, inner harmony, inner union, right? What we want to do is create that balance within ourselves. And if we're staying polarized, that's the opposite of that. Like that is in direct contradiction to the thing that we actually want, right? So let's talk a little bit. I want to unpack, because I'm mad about it. I want to unpack why this is wrong, right? So for one, it's extraordinarily heteronormative, right? Like I said, it's basically, it's patriarchy repackaged and sold as a spiritual teaching. And as I said, there is a spiritual teaching that is beneath it that I just explained about how you use the mirror of polarity in order for self-knowledge, so you can transmute and so you can come into balance yourself, right? So there is actually a teaching that goes with this, but they're teaching it wrong, like so wrong that they're teaching the opposite thing, right? So yeah, first of all, it's extremely heteronormative, and there's nothing wrong with heteronormativity. Like there's nothing, if someone wants a heteronormative relationship, right? As long as it's a choice, as long as they're really experiencing that balance, then like that's fine. There are plenty of healthy relationships where people are assuming traditional gender roles, right? But in this teaching, it becomes a mandate. It becomes, if you are not doing traditional gender roles, you are doing it wrong. First of all, we live in a universe of infinite possibility and infinite expression. So I know how they arrived at that conclusion, right? Because confirmation bias means that like if we're raised in patriarchy and patriarchy is benefiting us in some way, and then we see a spiritual teaching and we think it maybe looks like patriarchy, we're like, aha, look, that's the thing that I already believe. I have done none of my spiritual work. I've stayed mired in the matrix, and now I'm going to teach this like I know what I'm talking about. I'm pretty mad about this if you haven't noticed. So yeah. So I know how and I understand why it happens, right? But there's no growth, there's no transmutation, and it's these confining gender roles, and that's really, the masculine and feminine are polarities, right? Like these are polarities that exist, but they're not meant to be stagnant, they're meant to be energies that we can play with. And for me in particular, I am a non-binary femme. I also accept the term woman, although I don't identify as cis, although I am cis passing. I have cis privilege, right? But I am a non-binary femme, and and anyone who has shown up in this sort of twin flame dynamic with me has been like the opposite of me, right? Like their androgyny has been basically a mirror image of mine, right? There's someone who generally is also a cis passing man, but who has an androgynous presentation, or who leans toward like some sort of gentle gender bending, or has a certain feminine energy about him in the same way that I have a masculine energy about me, right? So you can be a non-binary twin flame. It just means that your twin flame is also probably going to be non-binary, right? Because you're going to be mirror images of each other, but you could be anywhere like that, right? And your expression, as long as it's healthy, is fine. The twin flame path doesn't care, what drag you put on when you get out of the shower, right? It's about that inner balance and making sure that your roles in the relationship are a healthy flow, like a healthy give and take, because you are balanced within, right? And that's another reason that polarity practice as it's taught is wrong mathematically, right? Because mathematically speaking, if you have this submissive, oh, I am dependent on, you know, I'm dependent on daddy, right? I'm dependent on this daddy figure, this my masculine leader, you know, to tell me, to show me the way, right? And you have this masculine figure who must be in charge and control all the time, and his woman will surrender as long as he is in his masculine power, and which is just so unhealthy. You know, I don't want to even think about the kinds of abuse that have been rampant in spiritual circles as a result of this crap being taught, right? But even more so, like if we're just talking about the mechanics of it, the mathematics of it, right? What happens then is that these two people are then dependent on one another, right? Who am I as a masculine leader if I don't have my feminine, you know, counterpart doing her surrender thing, right? Who am I as a feminine person if I don't have a man telling me what to do? Which, by the way, was all the stuff that I had to transmute, right? This is personal to me because, right, and I alluded to this, you know, early on in the video, why this is, you know, it's especially personal to me is because before I entered any sort of spirituality circles, long before I had an awakening, right? Long before I even knew what the twin flame path was, I was in the BDSM community and I was a submissive, and I was exactly what they are describing when they talk about that surrendering feminine. And I can tell you, like, nobody was more submissive than me. Like, oh my goodness, I had no boundaries whatsoever. I let my dominant partner just absolutely walk all over me, and it ended up with me, you know, financially supporting him, bailing him out of jail for $25,000 because he went and got his business shut down that I worked at, you know, also because he, you know, didn't listen to me when I said, hey, maybe you should stop doing these, you know, kind of gray area legal practices, right? I was a pro dom. I was working for him at a dungeon in New York City, and we got shut down because, you know, there were raids happening, and it was like the era of like stop and frisk, if you guys remember all that. Like New York City was having this big crackdown. I don't want to get into that right now, but my point is, I was so submissive. I surrendered so hard. I let go of my better judgment when this man said, no, this business is fine. We're going to keep running things as it's been. And I'm like, well, I guess you're the guy in charge. So, okay, you know, and I just ignored that. And sure enough, you know, we got raided and he was literally led away from me in handcuffs. And then a year later, you know, there I am having bailed him out of jail, and I'm financially supporting him, and he turns physically abusive, you know? I have seen the end of this pattern. It is not good. It does not lead to a good place, right? It doesn't. And maybe you're saying like, well, you needed a divine masculine who was a better leader. Well, yeah, A, no shit. But B, my surrendering, my submissiveness, my femininity did not get me that. The only thing that has improved that and improved all my relationships, you know, is me actually coming into center and learning to set boundaries, and learning that there are actually, like, there's times that I do need to take control and set boundaries and say, this is okay, this is not okay, or this is what I'm doing and you're welcome to do it with me or not, or this is what's right for me. And I know, you know, that is what's actually led to me having better quality relationships, right? Man, you know, it's just wild how that, it's just wild, you know, how they want you to believe that. And it's just like, man, if you are teaching feminine surrender without teaching feminine discernment, then you are just setting women and femmes up for abusive relationships. So yeah, so I get pretty angry about that, right? So there's a difference between duality and polarity, right? Polarity, and I obviously I've titled my album "Oh Polarity." I really love the concept of polarity. I'm mad that these folks have largely stolen the name polarity practice to talk about this crap that they're teaching that is absolutely very, very wrong. But the difference between duality and polarity. And this was in part inspired by a talk with my Bagua teacher. I'm a student of Baguazhang, which is an internal martial art. It's a Chinese martial art. And so, basically Bagua also being based in Eastern philosophy, there's also that spiritual component and these teachings about polarity, right? So I've had this discussion with my teacher here in Los Angeles, Yun Wenri. She's just incredible. And polarity, right? If you think of like the yin yang symbol, like in polarity, there's flow, and there's, the two are harmonizing and they're flowing with one another, right? Whereas duality, and when she teaches this, she shows like as opposed to a yin yang, it would be like a circle just with like a black and white cookie, right? Like, which is with a line down the center and black on one half and white on the other half. And it's like, there's no flow, right? It's just one is that and one is that. So the difference really is about, do you have flow or do you have stagnation? Because when you do have a sacred union relationship, when you achieve what is, known as the hero's gamos, right? You have your own inner union, and then you attract a partner who, of course, then is also going to mirror that balance in you, right? That is the 11-11, as we've learned, right? That's a relationship between two people who are each balanced within themselves, and that's 11-11. That is your twin flame relationship. That is sacred union. Congratulations, right? When you have that, there is not that same codependent need for one another, right? Because you're whole within yourselves. And this was very personal to me at the very start of my twin flame awakening. Again, before I understood any of this, before I even knew what a twin flame was, I remember having this stuff come up around my relationship to BDSM. When I met my first twin flame, I still identified as a submissive. And I realized that my staunch identification with submission meant that I wasn't actually giving myself the choice of whether I was in service to a partner or not, right? There was something about me that had to identify with submissiveness so hard because what if I didn't have to? What if I didn't always have to serve my partner? What if I didn't always have to have a perfect dinner prepared? What if I didn't always have to perform sexually at a moment's notice, right? What would that mean? Would I still want to? And for me, I got a lot of enjoyment out of those things too. Like I got that dopamine hit. So the idea but if I didn't have to do it all the time, right? Would I actually still want to? And that, like, when I saw that question pop into my head, at that time, it was like, it's like almost 6 years ago now. And I just saw like a different version of myself walking around in my own kitchen, like, yeah, I can cook for you if I want, but I don't have to. And it was such a strange, more mature, right, picture of me. But it was really jarring, right? Why was I not actually letting my submission be a choice? I kept saying like, no, it's healthy because it's a choice. I'm choosing it, right? But I had locked myself into this identity so strongly that I wasn't actually considering choosing it. And that was eye-opening. So when you do have this balance of the 11-11, you're going to have that flow, right? You're going to have that flow where it's like, yeah, sometimes I'll pick where we go for dinner. Sometimes you will. Sometimes it's not a big deal, right? And you don't have that. You don't forever need someone to either be making the decisions or for someone to, validate your decision-making ego by always going along with you, right? You can't have, if you're just leader and follower, right? You can't have leader without like who you're going to lead if you're alone, right? And if you're a follower, and trust me, I related to this a lot, right? When I was single, I would feel lost, right? Because I had no one giving me any direction. And that is that codependence. That's toxic. That is unhealthy. That is not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is that balance. And then then it's like if we want to cosplay the divine feminine and masculine in the bedroom sometimes, sure, right? Why not? But then it's a choice, right? Then we can be in flow, right? And then the next time we can switch it up or whatever, right? That sounds fun too. Right? So So there are people out there who try to defend polarity practice, and they're like, well, it works for some people, right? And it's like, no, it doesn't. If you're going to teach something as a spiritual truth, it has to be a spiritual truth across the board, right? And maybe it's again, it has to be like a mathematical equation, right? Whether you use that equation or not in your lifetime, it has to always work out that way. It's like 2 + 2 = 4, right? It's like not like, oh, well, sometimes 2 + 2 is 5 for some people. Like that's not how a spiritual teaching is going to work. It's going to be a cause and effect. It's going to be like math, right? And yeah, so the people who are like, oh, well, it works for some people, I look at that and I'm like, well, yeah, dominant submissive relationships also work for some people, right? There are healthy dom sub relationships out there, right? But it's actually because underneath the costuming, both of them actually get a voice and a choice in how things are gonna go, not because they're polarized, right? It's because they're playing dress up for funsies, and that's cool, right? But then if it is a healthy relationship, then beneath that, each of them is going to have the ability to be independent, set their own boundaries, do stuff on their own, and not have that toxic need for a partner to always be either guiding them or always be obeying them. So no, it doesn't just work for some people, unless what you're talking about is that you're just playing dress up, and that's fine, that's your business, but then you should not be teaching a whole bunch of workshops that this is like a spiritual paradigm that's going to solve your relationship problems, because that's wrong. Super wrong. But anyway, yeah, I think that's about all I had to say on it. I know that was a lot already, but yeah, man, polarity practice. If you see polarity practice anywhere, just run. just wait for my album instead. Thank you guys. I'll see you next time.